The little house sat quietly at the edge of the village, its wooden walls darkened by time, its corners softened by years of wind and weather. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tea leaves and old pine. The evening sun slanted through a narrow window, spilling golden light across the floor like a memory too stubborn to fade. An old woman sat in her low chair by the window. Her back was bent, her shoulders fragile, but her presence carried a quiet dignity. Her hands, veined and wrinkled, rested upon her lap as though they had been carved by the years themselves. They were hands that had tilled soil, carried children, buried loved ones, and held on when everything else slipped away. At her feet sat her granddaughter, a little girl with curious eyes as wide as the sky outside. She leaned forward, her chin resting on her palms, watching her grandmother as if the old woman were the keeper of all the world's secrets. "Grandma," the child whispered, "tell me one of your stories again." The grandmother turned her gaze from the fading light to the small, waiting face before her. A slow, tired smile touched her lips. The kind of smile that carried both tenderness and sorrow. "My little bird," she said softly, her voice hushed with age. "If I tell you, you must listen not only with your ears, but with your heart. These are not fairy tales. They are the reasons I am still here, bae." The girl nodded eagerly. Her tiny fingers crept into her grandmother's hand, clutching it as though she could anchor the stories before they vanished. The old woman drew in a breath, her eyes unfocused, drifting far away into a time when she herself was young. And as her voice began to weave the past, the small room seemed to bend, its walls thinning into memory. "The first winter after the war began," she murmured, "was the hardest." The images rose in her mind, sharp and unrelenting. Snow fell, all heavy over a village broken by conflict. Houses sagged beneath its weight, their roofs patched with rags and prayer. Inside one such house, a fire burned weakly, its warmth too fragile to touch the bones of those gathered near it. A pot hung above the flames, steaming with nothing more than water, tinged by the memory of cabbage. She remembered her mother ladling the thin broth into small bowls, her face pale from hunger but steady as stone. The children accepted the offering without complaint, sipping silently. The young girl, the grandmother in her youth, looked down at her portion, then across the fire at her younger brother. His lips were trembling from the cold. His fingers clutched the bowl as though it were the last thread holding him to life. Quietly, she slid her own bowl across the dirt floor toward him. "Take mine," she had whispered. "I'm not hungry." It had been a lie, but one that tasted truer than her hunger. Back in the present, the grandmother closed her eyes, her hand trembling faintly in the child's grasp. "When you love someone," she said, "their hunger hurts more than your own." That was the first time I learned what love truly was. Not soft and sweet, but sharp. A fire that burns even as it warms. The granddaughter frowned. "But weren't you hungry too, Grandma?" The old woman smiled gently and brushed her thumb across the girl's knuckles. "Yes," she said. "But he needed it more. That is what it means to carry love in your bones." Her voice fell quiet for a moment, lost again in the flicker of the fire that lived only in memory. Then she whispered, "Even in those dark days there was light. My mother had a voice as soft as the wind. At night, when the shadows pressed close, she would sing. And the grandmother remembered. A flickering lamp, her mother's weary figure by the hearth, her voice steady despite the emptiness in her eyes. Allah, Ulabai, low and trembling, filled the darkness like a thread, holding the fragile world together. The young girl lay awake, her brother's small hand in hers, whispering to him, "As long as Mama sings, we will live." In the present, the old woman's lips curved faintly. "Her song saved me more than once," she said. "Even when the world outside roared and the cold tried to steal us, her voice reminded me that beauty still lived, even in the cracks." The child shifted closer and rested her head against the old woman's knee. "Can you sing it to me, Grandma?" she asked in a small, hopeful voice. The grandmother hesitated. Her voice had thinned with the years, fragile as paper. But slowly, she began to hum. The notes were broken, cracked with age, yet they carried the same fragile strength as her mother's had once done. The melody filled the little house, wrapping them both in something older than words, something that neither war nor hunger nor death had ever been able to silence. The granddaughter closed her eyes, and the old woman hummed on, both of them drifting into a silence that felt almost holy. A silence alive with memory, love, and the stubborn endurance of song. The teapot had gone cold, though neither the grandmother nor the child seemed to notice. The room was still, as if listening alongside the little girl, as if the walls themselves leaned closer to catch the threads of the old woman's memory. The grandmother's eyes drifted once more toward the window, where dusk deepened into shadow. Her voice, when it came again, was low and steady, like water running beneath ice. "When I was a little older than you," she said, "the world began to fall apart in ways a child could not understand. The flash of youth, she had been 12 when the first fire swept through her village. 12, with tangled hair and bare feet hardened by stone paths. The sound of gunfire had been like the sky itself tearing open, unnatural and merciless. She remembered running. The night was alive with flames, their light painting the sky in streaks of orange and black. She clutched her younger brother's hand so tightly that his small fingers went numb. Behind them, their mother's voice rang out. "Go! Go and don't look back!" The river had been their salvation. Its waters were cold and fast, carrying the ash and smell of burning wood downstream. She pulled her brother into it, dragging him across as gunshots cracked the air. His cries were small, swallowed by the current. She told him not to look back, though her own eyes had already betrayed her. Across the river, she saw her home collapsing in fire. The roof caved, sparks leaping into the dark sky like frantic spirits. Somewhere inside those flames, her mother's song had been silenced. She remembered the exact moment when her knees buckled in the mud, when the cold water dragged at her clothes, when grief struck so hard it left her gasping. But even then, she could not let go of her brother's hand. His frightened face forced her to stand again. She stood because she had no choice. The long road, for weeks, they wandered. Villages turned them away, already starving themselves. The roads were lined with the lost, mothers carrying silent infants, old men whose eyes stared at nothing, children who no longer cried. The young girl, the grandmother before time and sorrow bent her, grew harder with each step. She learned to steal potatoes from abandoned fields. She learned to silence her stomach, to sleep on cold ground with her brother's thin body curled against hers. But even steel bends under weight. One morning, her brother would not wake. His body was still, his face strangely peaceful, as if he had simply slipped into another world while she slept. The memory cut her voice even now. Her fingers, curled with age, trembled in her lap. I shook him. She whispered, her eyes unfocused. I begged him to open his eyes. I told him I had saved food for him, that I would carry him the rest of the way. But he did not answer me. Her granddaughter's hand tightened around hers. The old woman's voice broke. I buried him by the river. My hands were too small to dig deep, but I tried. I thought the water would keep him company. I thought perhaps he would hear Mother's voice in the current. She closed her eyes. For a moment, her chest rose and fell, as if she were still struggling to breathe through the sobs of that long-ago day. Returned to the present, the little girl had tears shining in her wide eyes. She pressed her cheek against her grandmother's frail arm. "Grandma?" she whispered. "You must have been so lonely." The old woman opened her eyes again. They glistened with the weight of years. Yet within them burned a quiet, unyielding flame. "Yes," she said softly. "I was lonely. Loneliness became my shadow. But I carried on because that is what love demands of us. To keep walking, even when no one walks beside us." The silence in the room deepened. Outside, the first stars appeared, trembling in the sky. The grandmother looked at them for a long while, then reached out and smoothed her granddaughter's hair with a trembling hand. Her voice dropped to a "ayata." The night had deepened. Shadows pressed close against the windows of the little house, though the lantern on the low table burned steadily, painting the room in a soft amber glow. The grandmother sat very still, her thin hands folded neatly in her lap. The child remained at her feet, leaning against her legs, unwilling to break the fragile spell of story and memory. The grandmother's voice, when it rose again, had softened, as if memory itself had paused to catch its breath. "After the river took my brother, I thought my heart had turned to stone," she said. "But the world is strange. Even after the deepest winters, spring finds a way back." A village of strangers, she had stumbled into a new village, half-starved and half-wild, her hair tangled and her eyes dulled by loss. A kind woman took her in, an aunt by marriage, distant and weary, but unwilling to turn her away. In that village, life was different. The fields still grew wheat, though smaller with each harvest. The people still gathered at dusk to share thin meals, to murmur prayers that tomorrow would be gentler. And in that place, among those strangers, she began to find herself again. There was a garden behind the house, small and stubborn. Rows of beans and cucumbers, stalks of corn fighting to stand against the wind. She worked there until her hands were blistered, until her arms ached. But there was pride in it. Pride in coaxing life from the soil instead of only fighting death. And there, in that narrow garden, she met him, the first smile. He was older than her by 3 years, tall, with laughter that seemed to chase away the heavy silence of the village. His family's home was nearby, and often he came to the garden to help, though sometimes it seemed he came only to watch her work. At first, she ignored him, her heart still locked in grief. But he was patient. He teased her when she dropped a bucket, shared stolen apples, and once, when she cut her hand on a sharp tool, he bound it gently with cloth torn from his own sleeve. His eyes were kind. Too kind, she thought, for a world so cruel. And slowly, against her will, she began to smile again. They would walk together in the evenings, down the dirt path that cut between palm fields. He told her stories of when he was small, of mischief and dreams of building a house with his own hands one day. She listened in silence at first, but soon she found herself telling him her own stories. Even the painful ones. He never flinched. He only listened, as though her pain deserved to be carried by more than just herself. The summer of promises. That summer was warm. The wheat swayed high in the fields, and the air smelled of earth and ripening fruit. The girl who had once run barefoot through rivers of ash now laughed in the sun, her hair loose, her hands no longer trembling. She remembered the night he took her hand for the first time. They were walking beneath the stars, the sky vast and endless above them. His fingers brushed hers, hesitant, then curled firmly around them. "I want to build a life with you," he whispered. "One that no fire can burn down." She had not answered at first, her throat thick with fear. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw not only hope but strength. A strength that made her believe for the first time that perhaps her life could be more than survival. She whispered back, "Then build it," the fragile ending. But summers never last. The war crept closer again. Men were taken, conscripted into battles that devoured them like dry grass in fire. He was among them. The day he left, he pressed a small carved pendant into her hand, a simple wooden bird, smoothed by his careful fingers. "Keep this," he said, "and when I come back, I'll put it on our door." She had kissed the bird, holding it against her chest, as though it could stop her heart from breaking. She watched him walk away down the dirt road, his figure shrinking into the horizon until he was only a shadow. He never returned. Weeks turned to months, and months into silence. She never learned how or where he died, only that he was gone. The carved bird remained in her hand long after her tears had dried, returned to the present. The grandmother's voice faltered, then steadied, though her eyes glistened in the lamplight. "I was still young," she murmured. "But I had already learned that love is both gift and wound. It fills you, and when it is taken, it leaves you emptier than before. But even emptiness has its purpose. It reminds you that you once held something worth grieving." Her granddaughter gazed up at her with wide, sorrowful eyes. "Grandma, did you ever stop missing him?" The grandmother shook her head slowly. "No, little bird. Some faces never leave us. They live in our bones, in the way we smile, in the way we dream. I carried him with me all my life, and though it hurt, it also kept me warm. Even grief, in its way, is a kind of love." The room fell silent. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The child pressed closer to her grandmother, wrapping her small arms around the old woman's fragile waist. And in that embrace, past and present twined together. The lost boy in the fields of wheat, and the little girl clinging to her grandmother's warmth, both held within the fragile, enduring light of memory.